Therefore, since ancient times, when human dissection was taboo, pigs have been used as substitutes for humans in dissection. Suddenly, someone called out to Haramaro's sweetie, our protagonist, approaching him with blood dripping onto the floor. The person asked if he understood the significance of this fact and remarked that, no matter how great a person is, 95% of them is still a pig. Haramaro then noticed his large coworker standing in front of him, holding a huge axe. The man asked if Haramaro was eyeing his position now after surpassing all the knife wielders who had been around for 4 or 5 years. As he raised the axe, he called Haramaro an arrogant brat. The man swung the axe down at him, but Haramaro stood still, not even flinching. The axe struck the pig's head behind him, splitting it in half. The man, then directing Haramaro to look at him, proudly declared that Haramaro was still far from surpassing his achievements. Unbothered, Haramaro turned around and began sharpening his knife, addressing the man as his boss and advising him to stop before breaking the workbench again. He added that the boss should get dressed. Juno, the World Livestock Products Manager, grabbed a piece of pork Haramaro had just sliced and proudly asked if it was too good to sell because of his skill. Sarcastically, Haramaro agreed and praised his boss. He then stabbed the pork carcass with his knife and easily slashed it open in one slice. Juno patted Haramaro on the head, calling him a great employee and asking who would believe such skill came from someone who had only been working for a year. Haramaro replied that if Juno wasn't going to help, he shouldn't get in the way. Juno then called Kim Young and asked her if she had heard that today's supply for Haramaro was delayed, suggesting she take him on a field trip. Kim Young didn't answer, instead continuing to chew her food, making Juno to call her multiple times. Finally, Juno snapped, shouting her name as he sat in front of a pile of food packaging. Kim Young, the World Livestock Products accountant, asked Juno what he meant by field trip, all while shoving more food into her mouth. Juno, frustrated, asked if she thought she was in a mukbang video and told her to stop eating so much. He informed her he was going to the sauna and instructed her to keep the office safe. She saluted him respectfully, wishing him a good trip and asking him to bring back something delicious. Juno then grabbed Haramaro, asking if he understood that he was being taken care of. Haramaro dryly responded that it was all a joke, reminding Juno that he barely paid him, worked him like a dog without any days off, and made him pull all-nighters when he didn't want to. He added that Juno dragged him around after work and now expected him to handle the slaughtering as well. Juno explained that it was all out of love for him and, before Haramaro could argue, reminded him of his first day on the job. When Juno tested him by asking him to butcher a pig, Haramaro had looked at the piglet and asked if he'd get paid for killing it. Juno pointed out that, unlike most people who would hesitate, Haramaro didn't even blink. Juno then grabbed a bucket of water and told Haramaro that he had known since then that he was a natural-born butcher. He poured the water over Haramaro's head, angering him. Haramaro, clearly frustrated, shouted that butcher or not. He couldn't believe Juno was bringing him out here during work hours. He sarcastically asked if Juno wanted a back massage. Ignoring the comment, Juno asked if it was true that Haramaro beat up all the kids during lunch, suggesting he used that strength to butcher instead. Haramaro asked if Juno planned to time him and pay him for overtime. Juno replied that he wasn't going to pay, prompting Haramaro to angrily question how he was supposed to work without pay. Juno then asked if Haramaro still needed a lot of money, to which Haramaro replied that he did. Juno promised him a money-making job, adding that, even if he couldn't rebuild his house, he could at least escape to the basement. Meanwhile, the other men in the sauna couldn't believe they were witnessing Juno's axe taking sauna. Haramaro reluctantly agreed to do the job and asked what it was. Juno asked if it was true that Haramaro had studied abroad in Japan, to which Haramaro confirmed. Juno told him it was perfect and that he should head to Japan right away, leaving Haramaro confused. The next day, Haramaro arrived in Japan, standing at the bus stop with his suitcase, utterly confused. As the reality of the situation sank in, he snapped, shouting, "What the heck is happening?" 6 months had passed since then. A Japanese livestock company, which urgently requested a supply, had brought Haramaro there. Frustrated, he angrily stabbed the pork in front of him, lamenting that he hadn't had a single day off in 6 months. He thought to himself that if he worked like this in Korea, he'd be earning the same, making him wonder why he was doing this in a foreign country. Haramaro glanced back, aware that the workshop was short on supplies and that he was the only butcher. As he looked at the old man sitting behind him, he noticed a Yakuza-like guy who had been smoking cigarettes for the past 6 months, seemingly watching him with ill intentions. Smiling, Haramaro spoke in Japanese, telling the man he shouldn't smoke, while muttering in Korean that the old man was an idiot, discreetly showing him his middle finger. The man only laughed. Haramaru then turned his attention to the most suspicious part of the job. He was being asked to cleanly separate only the ribs and everything else was discarded. The ribs felt strangely heavier than what he was used to handling, almost as if something was inside them. Haramaru noticed a thin line on the ribs, something only a butcher's trained eye would catch. He was certain it was a sign that the ribs had been cut and then reattached. He also observed a mysterious white powder leaking from the joint. Putting the pieces together, he realized the nature of the job. It was something no Japanese butcher could handle, a job monitored by a Yakuza involving unsanitary bone-cutting processes, ribs that had been tampered with and the strange white powder inside them. He had a suspicion, but when he glanced back at the old man behind him, he decided to stay quiet and focus on his work, knowing he'd be leaving soon anyway. The man then flashed him a pierced tongue, making Haramaru wonder if he should just leave right then. Later, back in Korea at the World Livestock Products office, Juno shouted over the phone, asking Haramaru if he really wanted to come back. Haramaru angrily replied that for 6 months, he had been working overtime every day, all by himself, with a Yakuza watching him, and asked if that made any sense. Juno brushed him off, questioning why Haramaru was acting like this now when he had been managing overtime and night shifts just fine. Haramaru insisted that the place was strange, but Juno dismissed his concerns, saying he had set everything up for him because Haramaru said he needed the money. Now, Juno accused him of betrayal, asking what would happen to his sister's tuition and his mother's credit card debt if he came back now. Juno then asked if making money seemed like a joke and told Haramaru to just hang in there for another month, promising to settle everything. Frustrated, Haramaru could only respond with an understanding nod before hanging up the phone. He cursed under his breath, angry that everything was always about money and furious about being stuck in that awful place. Back at work, Haramaru stabbed the pig in anger. He knew that if it weren't for the money, he would have quit long ago. He furiously questioned what Juno meant by just hold on for one more month. Suddenly, the Yakuza guy, Anaki, sweetly called his name in Japanese. Approaching Haramaru, Anaki scratching his balls, making Haramaru angrily wonder where the hell that guy's hand had been. Anaki pinched Haramaru's face, sweetly thanking him for working so hard and saying that without him, they'd be in big trouble. Haramaru seethed internally, disgusted that Anaki had touched his face with the same hand he'd just used to scratch himself. He wanted to shout that today would be the day Anaki died. Anaki then complimented Haramaru, saying the more he watched him, the more impressed he was with his knife skills, even suggesting that he might scout him. Haramaru, barely holding in his rage, felt like Anaki had pushed him too far. But then, he saw Anaki's gun and forced himself to calm down. Haramaru jumped away from Anaki, asking if he was trying to compliment him or something. Anaki replied that it wasn't exactly like that and explained that today was his girlfriend's birthday, so he was leaving early. He added that his youngest would be taking over for him. Just then, another man appeared, calling out to Anaki. Anaki, pleased, said it was perfect timing and introduced the man as his adorable youngest. Haramaru was stunned when the huge, tattooed man apologized to Anaki for being late. He couldn't believe this was the youngest. What shocked him even more was when Anaki mentioned that the man was the same age as Haramaru, 23 years old. Anaki introduced Haramaru to the man as the Korean butcher and instructed him to set the prepared ribs aside. He warned the man to be careful because the ribs were their livelihood. The man nodded, assuring Anaki he understood. The man picked up the bowl of ribs and asked Anaki which side was that side, irritating Anaki, who pointed and told him to just put it down. The man then asked if it was the east side or the west side, causing Anaki to shout in frustration, telling him to place it wherever he thought was right. Haramaru watched the exchange when suddenly, the butcher's shop shook violently. He felt dizzy as the ground trembled beneath him, thinking it was an earthquake. Haramaru bent down, trying to keep his balance. Anaki yelled at the man not to drop the ribs and the man promised he wouldn't. But the shaking intensified and the man lost his grip, causing the ribs to fall. One of them snapped on impact, releasing a white powder. Haramaru quickly covered his mouth as the white powder spread around them. Anaki, sweating nervously, asked if this was Haramaru's first earthquake. Anaki then told him not to worry, explaining that bone powder often flew around and reassuring him to leave it to them and continue working. Haramaru nodded while still covering his nose and mouth, turning back to his work as Anaki berated the man, calling him a clumsy fool and ordering him to pick up the ribs quickly. The man immediately complied, scooping up the ribs from the floor. The man then asked Anaki if the butcher had come from Korea, to which Anaki replied yes. The man questioned whether that meant the butcher wouldn't know the ribs were drugged, since he couldn't understand Japanese. Anaki, furious, shouted at the man to shut up. Haramaru's heart pounded. He had just learned that the white powder in the ribs was drugs. He peeked back at them, only to see Anaki glancing back at him. Anaki warned the man that the Korean butcher could understand Japanese. Haramaru's blood ran cold when he turned and saw Anaki pointing a gun at his head. Anaki apologized, and Haramaru froze, stunned with fear, wondering if his life was about to end right there. He thought about how all he had done was butcher pigs and work tirelessly every day to feed his family. Now, he was going to die so meaninglessly. Haramaru didn't want to die, especially not like this. As Anaki prepared to pull the trigger, blood suddenly splattered everywhere. Haramaru heard Juno's voice in his mind, asking if he remembered his first day on the job. When Juno had tested him by asking him to butcher a pig, Juno reminded him that anyone would hesitate before killing an animal, but Haramaru hadn't even blinked. Juno added that most people get agitated after killing for the first time, but Haramaru hadn't shown any signs of distress. Instead, he had thought carefully about how to butcher the pig. That was why Juno believed he was a natural-born butcher. And then, in that moment, Haramaru acted. He swung his knife, severing Anaki's hand before he could fire the gun. Anaki cursed in pain, clutching his arm as blood poured from the wound. Haramaru stood over him, his eyes bloodshot, fully aware of his skill. He had butchered countless pigs, and knowing that humans and pigs are 95% alike, he understood exactly where to cut and stab to make someone die. With that knowledge, he swung his knife forward. Haramaru stabbed the knife into Anaki's neck, piercing deeper before pulling it out, causing blood to splatter everywhere. For a brief moment, he questioned whether he was killing a pig or a person. When Anaki collapsed to the ground, it became clear it was a person. Suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. As he turned, he saw the other man lunging toward him in a fury, trying to grab him before slamming him hard against the wall, causing the entire butcher shop to shake. The man punched Haramaru in the face, causing him to cough up blood, demanding to know how he dared to do such a thing. The punches came in rapid succession as the man angrily ranted about how kind their boss had been and how Anaki had planned to propose to his girlfriend that day. As the man prepared to land another, more dangerous blow, Haramaru realized the threat and thrust his knife forward in desperation, managing to stab the man in the stomach. Shocked for a moment, the man hit him again, calling him a brat and telling him that a mere stab wound was nothing new to him. Haramaru's face bled heavily as he struggled to comprehend how the man could withstand such an injury. The man reached out with both hands and wrapped them tightly around Haramaru's neck, choking him with the intention of crushing his throat. Haramaru's vision blurred as his air supply dwindled, his consciousness slipping away with each passing second. In the haze of near unconsciousness, Haramaru heard Juno's voice in his head, reminding him of the lessons about pigs, how their bones were strong and their fat thick, requiring careful knife work to cut cleanly. Juno had told him that a true butcher always knew the best path to take, and for Haramaru, that path would come instinctively. In that moment, Haramaru's eyes focused on the man's ribs beneath the layers of fat. With what little energy he had left, he gripped the knife embedded in the man's belly and twisted it. Summoning the last of his strength, Haramaru screamed and moved the knife sideways, slashing the man from the inside out. Blood splattered onto Haramaru as the man collapsed, freeing him from certain death. Haramaru pushed the heavy body off him and stood up, realizing the man was heavier than any pig he had ever butchered. The sight of the carnage made his stomach churn, and he vomited, unable to contain the overwhelming nausea. Dazed and dizzy, Haramaru tried to convince himself it had been self-defense. If he hadn't acted, he would have been the one to die. But doubt knotted him. Would the police believe him if he turned himself in? He knew they would likely dismiss it as an excuse. Worse yet, he had bigger problems than the police, the Yakuza. He realized there was only one solution: burn everything. Just then, the door burst open, and another man stormed in, shouting at Haramaru and brandishing a gun. Haramaru turned, stunned that there was yet another opponent. The man opened fire, cursing him for killing their comrades and calling him a low-level grunt. Haramaru immediately bolted, dodging the bullets, while the man taunted him, vowing to chase him down and kill him no matter where he ran. Haramaru raced into a nearby room, only to hear the man mockingly shouting behind him, calling him a coward and warning him that the room he'd entered was a dead end, the freezer. The man followed him inside, still shooting and demanding that Haramaru die, cornered with nowhere left to go. The man stopped shooting and looked around, realizing Haramaru was hiding. He taunted him, calling him names and asking if he thought he could hide forever. The man slowly walked further inside, offering Haramaru a quick death if he crawled out and begged. He then paused, noticing a pair of boots hiding behind one of the hanging pigs. With a sneer, he remarked on how well Haramaru was hiding, pretending he couldn't find him. The man aimed his gun at the boots and fired, destroying the box in front of them, but his expression turned to shock when he saw it was just a pair of boots. In that instant, Haramaru came out from behind, kicking one of the hanging pigs. He cursed at the man, calling him Yakuza scum. The man whipped around, startled, as the pigs hanging from the pole began to swing and collide with each other. One of the swinging pigs slammed into the man, knocking him hard against the wall. Coughing up blood, the man insulted Haramaru, his pain evident. Without hesitation, Haramaru leaped forward, brandishing his knife, aiming to end it. He shouted at the man in rage, frustrated by all the insults. The knife stabbed into the man's shoulder joint and Haramaru cursed at him, telling him to shut up. The man, despite his injury, smirked and called him a fool, saying he should have gone for the throat. At that moment, Haramaru realized the man had his gun aimed at his head. He called Haramaru a pig and prepared to fire, but his finger wouldn't move. The man's face filled with shock and confusion as he wondered why he couldn't pull the trigger. He demanded to know what was happening, his voice rising in panic. Haramaru remembered Juno's teachings about pigs. Juno had explained that the brachial plexus, the nerve bundle that ran from the spinal cord to a pig's front leg, was similar to the one in humans. He had shown Haramaru the exact location in a pig's shoulder, saying that stabbing there would render the muscles useless, whether it was a pig or a person. Juno had smiled, asking if Haramaru could feel the 95% similarity between humans and pigs and predicted that eventually, Haramaru wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. Haramaru removed the knife from the man's shoulder. The man tried to plead for his life, but Haramaru, glaring at him, ignored the plea and stabbed him to death.